Hello, dear evaluation community. Welcome to the opening event of the Glocal Evaluation Week 2025 on its seventh edition. Glocal Evaluation Week is organized by the Global Evaluation Initiative, the GEI. That's a global partnership committed to strengthening national M&E systems for evidence-based decision-making. Since its launch, Glocal Evaluation Week has hosted thousands of events across multiple time zones to become one of the world's largest M&E knowledge sharing platforms. Today, we welcome you as the first of a series of 5 launch events that are designed to kick off the debate about evaluation for a better future, environmental sustainability, inclusion, and peace. My name is Claudia Olavarría. I am the global coordinator of the Glocal Evaluation Week, which is only possible due to the committed contribution of the nearly 200 event organizers and, of course, our fantastic and committed Glocal team. Next week, from June 2nd to June 6th, each one of you will have the opportunity to join 375 events. Thank you very much to everyone for making this possible. This Glocal Evaluation Week 2025, it's a call to reimagine evaluation as a technical exercise, but also as a dynamic practice for inclusion, for collaboration, and for transformation. Evaluation gives the voice to the unheard, fosters accountability, and also provides clarity and care amid uncertainty. In a time of fragmentation and disconnection, evaluation can build bridges, grounded in evidence and rooted in dialogue, and essential to rebuilding trust and driving collective process. So this is our invitation today, and please help me welcome the moderator of this event, Patrizia Cocca, who is the Communication and Knowledge Management Lead at the GEI. Dear Patrizia, please, the microphone is yours.
Thank you, Claudia. Thank you very much. I'm honored to be with you all today. This has been a lot of work preparing this week, so we are all very excited. And I'm very excited to see that we already have 170 participants coming in and joining, and many more will be joining us. Before I start, I want to remind everybody that we are using an AI-based interpretation. On the bottom of the screen, on the toolbar, you will see a globe. The globe will allow you to choose the language that you wish to listen to. Please let us know how this is working for you and if it allows you to follow the conversation more closely and better.
请让我们知道这对您有什么用，以及是否可以让您更密切、更好地关注对话。
A few seconds just to tell you how much we have been discussing this opening, because for us it was very was essential to start to put forward the idea that evaluation indeed can build bridges. It can help to have a common understanding of what we observe, that we have a common understanding of what we are talking about, and therefore be the basis for dialogues and be the basis where we can bridge different opinions and different point of view. So, evaluation is not just about data. It's about values, relationships, and responsibility. And in the face of disinformation, inequality, eroding trust,
यह मूल्यों, रिश्तों और जिम्मेदारी के बारे में है और इस सूचना असमानता के
So today we will hear from diverse voices that will guide us through this very complex topic. And so I'd like to start to introduce you, and we are very honored to have David Hayward. David, is really my pleasure to introduce you as a keynote speaker. David is a former BBC journalist and is a seasoned media consultant who has worked to counter disinformation in conflict and transitional settings, such as Moldova, Syria, and Ukraine. And so today he'll speak about why fighting toxic narratives is essential for building a better future. Please welcome David. David, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for Patrizia for inviting me to take part, and thank you so much for yes. I'll just share my screen, but thank you so much for inviting me to participate in this incredibly valuable event and this incredibly valuable discussion. I'm hoping that everybody can see my screen, and I'm hoping that everybody can hear me. What I've done is obviously to start at the end of the presentation just to fool everybody there. So harnessing evidence and to bridge divides. Now, because my background is in media and in journalism, I'm going to concentrate on this field and these areas. In the preparation for this, I was asked to concentrate on the positives and to look for solutions. Now, I promise I will do that, but you'll understand as a journalist how hard that can be. So please bear with me while I talk about one or two issues and challenges that we face as society. Whether it be the terminology of toxic narratives or misinformation or fake news, I think journalism is facing an existential threat. And this is only heightened when it comes to mis and disinformation around conflict and in war zones. Whether that be the full-scale invasion of Russia of Ukraine or the conflict in Pakistan and India in Kashmir, or the crisis that's happening in Gaza. As a global society, we are bombarded daily by sophisticated and creative false narratives, misleading information. Billions of people are exposed to this daily on social media platforms, whether that be Facebook or whether that be the Contact or TikTok or Telegram. It's incredibly hard to tell the truth from the lies and very hard to tell the toxic narrative from the evidence-based public interest quality journalism. As a result of this, I do believe that the journalism and the media industry are facing as great a threat as we ever have done. Trust in the media is at its lowest. It's certainly at the lowest that I've ever experienced, and I've had 30 years working in the industry. It's looking at, but there are some positives. Organisations like the Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism and its Trust in the News project looks at why people are not trusting the media and why people are becoming disengaged with journalism, but also looking at how they can rebuild that trust and how we can rebuild that relationship between the audience and the media. But more of that later on. I'm a huge believer in the importance of the fourth estate. I'm an enormous believer that journalism has a role to play in society and in any democracy in holding power to account. A good, a balanced, a fair and an impartial and independent media is absolutely essential. Misinformation, fake news, toxic narratives are undermining that. They're undermining that trust. And I believe it's time that we need to grab and to fight back, to rebuild that trust in the relationship between the audience and between the audience and the media. I'm going to give you a couple of examples here. The first example is, this is a photograph of a politician called Michael Gove. Now, Michael Gove was a politician and very vocal in the debate and the discussion around whether Britain should leave the European Union, which became known as the Brexit campaign. Now, the Brexit campaign it divided a country and it divided a nation, and it divided it along a couple of different areas, one of the areas being the economy. And Michael Gove was consistently asked by journalists and asked by other politicians what leaving the European Union would do to the British economy and do to British business. Now, at the time, 95% of the experts, 95% of the economists said it would be bad, that it would be bad for Britain, bad for British business and bad for the economy. Michael Gove gave this quote: "I think people in this country have had enough of experts from organisations with acronyms saying that they know what is best and getting it consistently wrong." In that statement, I believe he undermined the expert knowledge. And this was an example of populism, of opinion over fact, where experts' opinion was just dismissed. Don't forget, this is 95% of all of the economists and all the business leaders in the UK saying that it would be a bad thing to go. And in one wave, he's just gone, wow, yes, but that's what they think. We think something differently. And that's where I believe we have a huge challenge in rebuilding that expectation and rebuilding that trust with evidence.
और एक तरह से, अगर आप अभी
Eso es lo que piensan. Pensamos algo diferente y ahí es donde creo que tenemos un gran desafío.
Ao reconstruir essa expectativa e reconstruir
Mtaalamu,
sasa hilo
liko
wazi sana. Ninataka kukuletea aina mbaya zaidi na asili zaidi ya mis na habari
from a trip earlier in this month. Keir Starmer, the Prime Minister of the United Kingdom, President Emmanuel Macron of France, and the newly elected Friedrich Merz, the Chancellor of Germany, got on a train and went for talks with President Zelensky in Kiev. Now, within a very few moments, there were things like images like this appearing, seeming to suggest that these three world leaders in front of the world's press would be taking cocaine. And they claimed to be suggesting that these pockets and there was evidence that cocaine was on the table. Now, it took a matter of seconds for organisations like the BBC to debunk this and to show the images and to show that this was absolutely not the case. But the very fact that the BBC had to come and say that these world leaders weren't taking cocaine, I think, is a very dangerous narrative. I think we're in a very dangerous place where toxic narrative, where misinformation can spread so quickly and so fast that hundreds of millions of people actually believe it. When you look at where the information was being shared, it was being shared from senior figures within the Kremlin, from senior figures within Russia, and from well-renowned conspiracy theories like Alex Jones in the US. We need to understand where this toxic and where this false and misleading information is coming from to combat it. So let's look at some of the solutions. The Reuters Institute for the Study of Journalism, in their research, have found the most important, and in analysing and in questioning the audience, they've tested what the most important thing about regaining trust in the media is, and that's transparency. Transparency in the work that you do and transparency in public service journalism, which is independent, impartial and unbiased. It's a great privilege for me to have worked with the public broadcaster in Ukraine. I've worked with them for the past 7 or 8 years, and this was a photograph that I took when I was there last week. We worked to set up independent, fair, balanced and impartial journalism, which is transparent, where the evidence for their reporting, the evidence for their sources is well known and well developed and shown throughout their work. Also, we worked with these journalists in combating mis and disinformation, in fact-checking, in verification. And we have trained, and I personally have trained hundreds of journalists all over the world in combating mis and disinformation and looking at verifying facts and doing very basic and quite simple techniques and using quite simple tools, but tools that maintain the trust in the media. Here's just one example. I worked with a group of Syrian journalists during the fall of the President Assad of Syria regime. And it was circulating, great rumors were circulating on social media that the guy in the top right-hand corner, as you can see here wearing the uniform, claimed that, and this is Hossein Salami from the Iranian Revolutionary Guard, and there were claims that he'd been captured in northern Syria, and images of the guy on the left were circulating. Now, it took, and had the media organisations that I'd done just simply posted and shared this content, then I think then things would have been incredibly difficult for them. Because as soon as you post false narratives, as soon as you post false information, you lose trust. A very simple tool which looked at facial recognition proved that these two people were not the same person, and we were able to get around that potentially difficult situation. Those are two just personal examples, but media literacy is incredibly important as well. In Ukraine at the moment, there are projects targeting school children where board games are being used to, through play, teach the children what is mis and disinformation and how to identify toxic narratives. At the same time, at the other end of the age spectrum, newspapers, printed newspapers, who can remember those, are being used to inform the older population as they pick up their pensions what is mis and disinformation and how not to be misled. These are some very personal examples that I've been involved in. I'll be willing to bring them up and to talk further about them within the discussion. But I wanted to look at the wider media organisation. My history is with the BBC, so I make no apologies of using the BBC as example. But the BBC is creating much more transparency and trust in its news coverage. It has recently launched and spent a tremendous amount of money and effort creating a team called BBC Verify, which consistently, and its sole job is to look at mis and disinformation and to debunk that mis and disinformation through transparency and through showing the workings and illustrating with evidence-based reporting why this is such an important thing, why people should not be suckered into believing false narratives, into believing toxic narratives. But it's not just the BBC. This is a guy called Elliot Higgins, and he runs an organisation called Bellingcat. And I go as far as saying Bellingcat is possibly the most important independent group of journalists in the world, who are, again, through transparency and through openness, through evidence-based reporting, combating and fighting mis and disinformation. I'm going to wrap it up there because I was threatened with severe sanctions if I overran my 10 minutes. But I'd love to follow up on any of the discussions and any of the debates. But thank you very much indeed for inviting me, and I look forward to continuing the discussion.
Thank you very much, David. I'm sure that you captured the audience with these great examples, and also for reminding us how toxic narrative can really erode trust into systems, including evaluative systems. And so now I would like to introduce to you a panel that we put together to bring you different perspective on how, from different organization, we are dealing with this problem of misinformation, but also like of erosion into the trust that the system, into the trust in the systems. Either they be government systems or media or any kind of scientific research. And so today we have several speakers, and the first one on my list is going to be Heriberto.
要么是任何类型的科学研究，所以今天我们有请
Advisor for the UNDP Human Development Report. And so Heriberto brings a long-term development lens to our discussion. And so I would like to invite Heriberto to share some insights from the UN Development Report and maybe explore the role of AI in leveraging evidence for a better future. But I don't want to anticipate too much. Heriberto, the floor is yours, and you have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much, Patrizia. It's a pleasure to be here. So first, I would like to commend David's presentation because it touches very important elements, in particular the erosion of trust when we deal with information. In our office, we produce a lot of indicators that try to give us an understanding of what's going on with development. The most important one is the Human Development Index. But something that we have seen also over the last few years is that the evidence, the traditional mechanisms to provide evidence are not working in the way they used to be. So it's not only that we have new processes of technology that are intermediating things in a different way, and I'll come back to that in a moment. It's also that the complexity of our society is in a way demanding for something better. Something that we have been uncovering, for instance, is how over the last few years there is a decoupling between the traditional indicators of development, income, for sure, but others, and the sense of security of people. So it used to be that the two things would go together, and now we can have cases where people are expanding their income and certain indicators of well-being, but at the same time increases in the levels of insecurity. So in that sense, there are now higher standards for us in order to capture what is happening with people. And this is something that I would like to stress a lot. So how do we push ourselves to better understand the concerns of people? And well, and we just published a report on artificial intelligence. And one of the good news of when we look at the technology is that even though it brings new challenges, it also gives us new opportunities. And in the report, I'm gonna, well, I cannot, you cannot see it, but in our report, we develop a framework because we don't ask whether AI will help us or not. The question we ask is under what conditions we can ensure that AI supports human development. And we characterize three factors. First, developing a complementarity economy. So the new technologies shouldn't replace it, should help us. Second, provide innovation with intent. So making sure that the new technologies really push us in the direction that we want and reaching things that before we couldn't do. And third, developing capabilities that count, because we cannot be relying on the same capabilities that we used to highlight in the 20th century. So I think this is for us the way to go. And I'm going to show just one example of how we can, in our office, are trying to combine some of these things. So maybe Megan can help us. So as I mentioned, we used to publish the Human Development Index, and it was very difficult to publish this for every country, but it was just one value for each country. Maybe you can go to slide 3. Slide 3, yes. Yeah, so this is, but thanks to the use of satellite data, new sources of information, and artificial intelligence, now we are able to provide information for every province, every municipality, and actually every small grid, every part of the planet. So this is a big breakthrough that allow us to do things that before we couldn't do. Also, it's something that we are implementing, not only using the Human Development Index, but also other indicators. But something that is very important is that now we need to learn how to use these tools, how to improve them. This is like ChatGPT 3, We need to then move to ChatGPT-4, and we don't necessarily have the capabilities to use it. So I think this is the goal for this community, to join forces to improve standards and make sure that we can use this information in a better way. I'm going to stop here, Patrizia.
Thank you very much, Heriberto. It's very interesting to see what you guys have been doing for advancing and using AI for the Human Index. And so let's see now if we move to the other office of UNDP today represented, which is the Evaluation Office of UNDP. And we have with us Anna Guerraggio. She's the Chief Engagement for UNDP IEO. And we invited Anna and asked her to speak about how the evaluation community is responding to today's global crisis. And I think she will challenge us to think about how we communicate evidence in a world with a short attention span. So Anna, this is really for you. Please.
Thank you so much, Patrizia. It's really a pleasure to be here. So I'm going to share a bit of a personal story about my journey in evaluation, and I hope that it touches on the themes that you asked me to speak to. So when I was hired as a research assistant for a UN evaluation office some 20 years ago, honestly, I had no idea of what evaluation really was. And over time, of course, I learned to pick up the jargon about accountability, learning, evidence-based decision-making. And I also learned how to navigate the struggles of the job, the data that are missing, the endless follow-ups, and also the persistent doubt that what we do really makes a difference. So 20 years later, I'm still here, and not just because we all need jobs, which we do, but because somewhere along the way, I fell in love with evaluation, with the fact that we can learn every day, and this is a luxury, the fact that we have the privilege of listening to people's stories, and also we kind of understand every day the world a little bit better. But there is one thing that I still very much wrestle with. And this is the idea that is quite common in some evaluation circles, that evaluation is the job for people who are very upright, who are very rigid, and they're not very concerned about being liked. And I've never been comfortable with that, maybe because I do like to be liked. But honestly, I think that sometimes we have confused the independence of the evaluation function, which is something absolutely necessary, with the need to be confrontational. Evaluators ask hard questions, but asking hard questions doesn't mean that we need to be hard people. And in fact, I believe that the opposite is true. Getting an honest answer to an hard question requires trust. And in order to build trust, we need to be humble. It means that we need to let go of our assumptions, that we set aside our egos, and that we really listen to how things are and not just how we think they should be. And I know that at this point, this might sound a bit confusing because evaluators are supposed to talk about data, about methods, about scientific rigor. And don't get me wrong, that's absolutely essential. I'm an economics graduate. My father was a mathematician, so I would never suggest that evidence is not important, particularly in today's world where so many decisions, as David also pointed out, seem to be shaped by an ideology or by instinct. But my point here is that evidence alone is not enough, because development is done by people, and people are fallible. People live in complex, sometimes chaotic environments, and do not always make decisions based on spreadsheet. So how do we get people to really listen to evaluations and then act on them? So a few years ago, I went back to school to study behavioral science, and I had this sort of haha moment, if you wish. And I realized that many of my assumptions about how people absorb information were simply wrong. So growing up, I had been taught that if someone doesn't understand me the first time, I just have to repeat myself again and again. But I learned that people often do not seem to listen, not because they don't want to, but because they cannot, because their brains are overwhelmed. And when they are overwhelmed, they react, they don't think. They go into what behavioral scientists call the system one brain methods. And for those of you who have kids and who have tried to get dressed in the morning, this is something that you will very much understand. It's impossible to stop and rationally decide what to wear when you have a 3-year-old that is screaming in your ears all the time. You just can't. And so it's quite similar in our world, where decision makers will not be able to sit down and read a full evaluation. So I think that we need to rethink how we communicate. We cannot rely anymore on 10-page PDF and expect them to create impact. And I'm not sure that the solution relies only on producing summaries either. We need to learn to tell stories. We need to make this evidence personal, human, and relatable. And the stories I'm talking about are not necessarily the stories of individuals who benefited of development interventions, but these are stories of organization, what they did, what they struggled with, and how they overcame these challenges. And my second point is that we also need to get better at meeting resistance. Because when people hear something unfamiliar or uncomfortable, which is often the case in evaluation, their minds shut down. That's cognitive dissonance. And we cannot just bulldoze our way through it. We need to be better at reading the room, not to please, but to connect, and to create the kind of space where real dialogue and real change can happen. And this doesn't happen on social media. And I think that in the past, we haven't trusted social media with a role that it was not theirs to do. So just to conclude here, I think that what keeps many of us in this field, and what drew me in as well, is hope. The hope that the evidence we collect can bridge the divides, that people take better decisions based on this evidence, and that things can change. So I hope that the story I share with you today convinces you that evaluation is not just about data and methods, but it's also about people and engagement, and that these two aspects, people and engagement, deserve better attention than it's currently the case. And with that, I give the floor back to you, Patrizia, and thank you all so much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Anna, really. This is very interesting to hear. And now I'd like to pass to Khalil Bitar. He is the president of the IOCE, the International Organization for Cooperation in Evaluation. And he will reflect on the role of evaluators as agents of trust, solidarity, especially in our kind of post-truth world. So maybe also he will touch upon the power of collaboration and the opportunity for young evaluators. But without further ado, Khalil, I'd like to pass the floor to you.
Thank you very much, Patrizia, and all the speakers before. And I thank David for his keynote. I think there's so much similarities between journalism and evaluation. It will be interesting to see how evaluators do journalism and journalists do evaluation at some point of time. I'm connecting with you from Colombo today, where we had just now the opening of the evaluation conclave and the summit for future of evaluation, which I'm focusing on because we are thinking a lot about the future of evaluation now. And you can tell that there's some feeling in journalism, in evaluation, and in many places and in many fields and professions, this sense of urgency. Yes, we have the polycrisis with the environmental degradation and the climate. We still have inequality. We have a lot of instability around the world. And just my idea for the people who are joining us today, for the speakers, for people who are working also on the Glocal Week, to imagine also the world without evaluation. Well, one scenario where we don't have evaluation at all. Or in that case, really, we don't have journalism at all. Imagine a world where policymakers, and sometimes it happens, but policymakers completely make decisions based on their wish and whims and without evidence. David has mentioned several times about evidence-based, how it is important to journalism. And evaluation also is very important. And I completely agree with Anna as well, that evidence evaluation is not only about evidence. So I think one of I'm always very interested to read in evaluation because it's a young field, actually 50, 60 years. But you see even early evaluators, when they start writing about evaluation, they were so much occupied by quantitative, qualitative, about methodological issues. But then the issue of participation, hearing the voice of the people. I think journalism is also about like that. It's sometimes about the evidence, yes, but also about having the voice of the voiceless heard by others. And by itself, it's a storytelling that tells so much more sometimes than evidence, although evidence is important part to it. And I think for future of evaluation, we really need to think about how we overhaul evaluation. If we keep thinking, defending evaluation and thinking, oh, look, the policymakers, they're, what are we in the evaluation field should do to fix certain issues in evaluation? A lot of evaluations are done sometimes to check box. A lot of evaluations have so many questions the evaluator can never cover. There's so many problems. And I think now with less funding to evaluation, with a lot of questions about who is evaluator, who's not, what is evaluation, what is not, maybe it is the silver lining that will invite us to challenge ourselves. Some of the reflection like colleagues have mentioned, Anna has mentioned, I think it resonate to me a lot. It's about how we speak to people, how we work, what are the competences that are important for us as evaluation. But yes, we are still stuck with the same old challenges: social inequalities, injustice, environmental degradation, radicalization, polarization. You want more misinformation, disinformation, post-truth, toxic narratives, and now AI with all its benefit, but also the risk. You showed, David, in journalism how it could, help and sometimes also do the opposite and hinder. And in evaluation, it's the same. If we take it, evaluate AI with a grain of salt and just think about it as something that is, we completely critical of it, then that's also a problem. You have to be open to it, but how to use it and how to make sure that we make the best of it. I really appreciate the global theme about evaluation for better future, environmental sustainability, inclusion, and peace. I think we need those more than ever. And I really think without evaluation, our world, like in case of journalism as well, our world will be not a better place necessarily. Things will not be as informed, as organized. There will be a lot of, what we see now in even some democracies where evidence and democratic processes are sometimes not followed. And that also affecting so many people. So the last word, just to say that we need evaluation, yes, but we need future fit evaluation. If we keep doing the same thing and complain about what is happening to evaluation and evaluators and our report without being open to completely ourselves challenge ourselves and collaborate, work together. GI now, for example, amazing leadership in our field. For us in IOCE, representing Evaluation Association, we are working with them, collaborating. We have others that are in the field. And I think we all need to work together as evaluators, individuals, as organizations, as UN agencies, in order for us to be creative, innovative, not necessarily always say that we are innovators, but actually try to be innovative. Hopefully this Glocal Week will come up with many creative partnerships. And I'm sure that with hundreds of activities happening. And I wish you all the best and thank you for your time and for sharing, for the opportunity to share with you. Back to you, Patrizia.
Thank you very much, Khalil. It's our pleasure to have you here and to hear from you. And now to conclude the panel, last but definitely not least, we have Irene Guijt. Irene, I'm almost there. Trying to get your last name correctly pronounced, but she is here as the former head of evidence and strategic learning for Oxfam in the UK. And so we would like to draw from Irene's experience in civil society to speak about using evaluation for advocacy, for social and climate justice, but not just that. But there was something that you said, Irene, as we were preparing the session, and you said, I really think that we need to have evidence that gives hopes, and that is not set into a framework that is too tight. And I really loved that idea, and I hope you can expand on that in your intervention. Irene, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much for the opportunity to be here. I think seeing so many people and so many perspectives already gives me hope, because it makes me remember that there are hundreds, thousands of people out there who are only the tip of an iceberg of activity around questioning and conversation about what works and what doesn't work and what might be better alternatives. And so just this week is already for me an expression of the hope in that global conversation. So I loved hearing the previous panelists, and related to a lot of what you were saying, and particularly the journey, Anna, that you were describing. So I was a researcher. I fell out of love with research. I was an evaluator. I fell out of love with evaluation. I was a monitoring specialist. I fell out of love with that. I'm very much focused on learning constantly. I think the learning piece is what's important. And I've been following some of the comments, and yes, evidence matters, but oh my goodness, we have so much evidence already. We're not using the evidence. What if we stopped doing evaluations for a year, or maybe even 2 years, and just used the evidence that we already have and started to implement some of those findings, and put all of our energy into bridging between the knowledge of what might make a difference and the doing of that difference. And so I've had a lot of love affairs and kind of fallen out of loves, but learning for me is absolutely got to be the backbone of why we're doing this. And Anna, you were talking about trust, and it means that you need to have learning partnerships. One of the big reasons that I fell out of love with evaluation is that they were not based often on learning partnerships. They were based on one-off moments that you weren't able to build a connection and an understanding of context. So, but back to I'm supposed to be sitting here representing civil society organizations, which is an impossible task because there's millions of them literally, and they come in all shapes and sizes. But if I think of the United Nations or governments as elephants, then I would say that civil societies, we are the swarm of insects that are making your life difficult, and that are nudging you and poking you and saying, wake up and stop doing that. And so I consider myself a little mosquito that's hovering around a number of elephants. And so what is the role of civil society organizations as mosquitoes in the evidence kind of ecosystem? I think there's a number of things that I've seen very effectively. One is that we call out problems that are often forgotten. Like, we don't go with the tide, we go against the tide often, and we're often not liked for that. I'm being there's a bit of a stereotype coming out here, but I am representing all civil society organizations in the world, so please forgive me. I think it's the calling out of problems. And Khalil, you mentioned this, I think one of the questions, are we asking whose future matters, whose voice is informing the evidence? And I think we don't often put our evidence base through a voice audit. We if that would be a really cool thing to do, is are the voices of those people whose lives are really not getting enough attention, are they loud in the evidence base that we're using or offering to make a decision? So that's one role that civil societies make, is really calling out and bringing in the voices of those who are often forgotten. The second role that we play is inviting people into the future. And this is where the hope story comes. It's often quite difficult for governments or big organizations to try small things. And there's reputations at stake and national relationships at stake and geopolitics at stake. Civil society doesn't care. We just try small things, but that's the problem, of course, is that these things stay very small. So I've been doing a lot of research. I've kind of moved out of researching about how terrible the world is, because like Anna, I don't believe that that is how people will be moved to action. People need to be shown the future. They need to be able to show, okay, you say there's a fire and here's the exit, guys. You got to show them these exits. So when we offer evidence about what might work, or little experiments that seem, okay, I'm at my 5 minutes. So Patrizia, just a little question from you. Can I take a few more seconds?
Go ahead.
Okay, so it was a slightly rhetorical question. I do apologize. Taking some time. Anyway. But the second thing is really showing that these small experiments are valuable, that they are possible, that they are equitable, that they are effective, and then working again with these learning partnerships with the elephants in the room to say, how do we scale this? And that's where I see a big opportunity not yet happening. We're adversaries too much. We're not yet talking together. And then the third role, and that's a small role because, you know, I think I've seen a lot of innovation come from civil society organizations on different ways to use stories, on, you know, different ways to use infographics, on, you know, different inclusive language processes. But to be honest, I think that the evidence and the data and the methods part, that is not our problem. We have cracked that nut many times over. We're not doing it. And I think as I'm getting older, I'm seeing the new generation not learning from the past. So I'm very curious about how the older evaluators feel about that. We've forgotten that in the 1970s and 80s, there was an enormous richness of participatory work around evaluation as well. And people seem to have forgotten that ever existed. So I think that civil society organizations, if you harness us well, you ask us what problems are not being called out, what voices are not being heard, and ask us to show that. You ask us to help offer some of these islands of hope, these islands of the possible, and how we could scale that. And you ask us to work with methodological innovation. But like Anna, I very much believe that it's not only about the head. It's got to touch our hearts if it's going to result in actions with our hands. And one of the final, I think one of the other problems that we have is that we aren't humble in terms of, we often talk about the next steps with a certainty that is absolutely not warranted. We are living in terribly turbulent times, and we are holding on to assumptions of stability and, you know, what might work tomorrow that are completely ludicrous. And so if we can bring a number of different futures into the thinking about evaluation, I think that we could be much better prepared for the many, many uncertainties that are unfolding all around us. Thank you.
Thank you, Irene. Thank you very much. I like this image that you left us of this swarm of insects annoying the big and slow animals, but very necessary to ask us, to let us understand also what are the questions that we are not asking, and that instead we should be asking before redacting any policy or taking any decision. It's a powerful image. Thank you. So now I'd like to ask a few questions. I saw that participants have left questions in the chat, but for us, the easiest way to follow is if you put them in the Q&A. So please, if you have questions, add them into the Q&A chat. So, but in the Q&A, we had one from America Hernandez, who asked what kind of information and message to give to regain confidence in the outputs resulting from the evaluation process. Who would like to address this? Maybe Anna, can I call upon you to respond on that?
Of course, I was hoping you wouldn't, but of course you did. But no, yeah, I was thinking about it. It's such a complex question. I'm not sure that we should focus on what kind of message or information will give confidence, but more about the process or the approach that we take. Because the information and the message, we deliver what needs to be delivered. It's not that by trying to being hopeful or trying to bridge divides, we should forget what we're there for, which is tell the truth, of things that happen and didn't happen. But I think that there are ways and tones that we should use in when we communicate about evaluation. So one of the things that I really appreciate in what Irene was saying is that we tend to start every presentation about evaluation with describing our methods, which I think is not only generally a boring thing to do for an external audience, but kind of create a distance in between we, the researcher, and you, the people. And I don't think that it's a good starting point for a conversation. So I think that overall, what we need to happen is that we need to understand that the person in front of us has really tried their best to implement the program in the way that they think was the most appropriate. And so not even, we come there once and we're trying to teach them things. I think that's the most important message I would try to deliver. We're not there to teach. We're there to learn and to help maybe have people see things that they wouldn't have otherwise.
Thank you, Anna. There was a question for David, was left right after your intervention, David, and about regulation, and if regulation could be a solution to fight misinformation, especially when it comes to social media. What's your take, David?
I think it's a very difficult thing to do. I think it would be incredibly difficult to regulate social media. And I think almost impossible now. I think and this is something that has happened in the past. I think it's very important for social media organizations to take on greater responsibility in identifying mis and disinformation, in identifying where false narratives and where toxic narratives are being shared on their platforms. And I would say that before about January this year, they were doing some of that, but post January this year, Facebook have stopped doing it, X have stopped doing it, and I think there are huge difficulties there. I think regulation is going to be impossible, I'm afraid, just on a very practical level. But I think more active engagement with combating mis and disinformation by the social media companies has got to be essential.
Is there anything evaluators can do? How they use social media in your opinion, or how do they use more traditional media? How can we get the message across?
Well, I think collaboration, and the more people evaluate mis and disinformation, and the more people that evaluate and then post "this is false" and post the true narrative and share the true narrative, or the more evidence-based narrative rather than the false narrative, I think the better. Because at the moment, and let's be honest, one of the reasons why mis and disinformation is shared very widely on social media is that it's sexy, some of it. I mean, the whole idea of President Macron, Keir Starmer, and Friedrich Merz taking cocaine on a train going to Kiev. That's a fascinating story. That's why people were sharing it, because it's sexy. People like that. It took the very boring BBC to say, well, actually, it's not true, chaps, for people to think about it. But the more as a community, evaluators, the more as a community, people that can dispel the myth, can dispel mis and disinformation, the better, as far as I can see.
Thank you, David. Okay, so there is another question from Laura Jimenez Umaña. What kind of an evaluator profile the word requires? Khalil, would you like to address that?
Sure, I can take that. I saw Irene has raised her hand before. Maybe she want to take that question, or is it something else, Irene?
I was actually responding to Patricia's question about how can evaluators use social media. But I mean, let's move on with other questions because there's so many questions. We can come back if there's time.
Okay. So I think in terms of what competences are needed, and I think this also can relate to question about rebuilding trust, what we said. I think two things. There's so many things that one can think about when having these questions, but I think two things for me are important. First, evaluation is as good as it is utilized. Even if you have the most fancy evaluation report, written whatever way, done with on paper, executive summary, or done in a nicest infographic information or movies, we've seen that. Changing the tools and the presentation without it being used, then it's really to no use in my view. So that's what to build the trust that we do evaluation, collect evidence, and then something happen after as in the evaluation. And for also as evaluators that we stop using people as data sources. And we say that a lot, but how many of us really come back to people and share with them the results, what happened? I collect from you feedback, and I collect from you focus group discussions and interview data and everything, but I never come back. They never see the report. And yes, we did have that in the evaluation field decades ago, that it is important to do that. How many of us actually doing it, and how much is the budget in evaluation is really allowing for anything like this? And if there's no budget, what else the option? Things we have to talk about. So the competences of evaluator now, I think going forward, in my opinion, yes, the competence will change from one place to another, but the global perspective, the system-oriented evaluation will be a key. It's enough with evaluating small project here and there and thinking it should change the world. And as evaluators, if we're equipped with these techniques are very important. Many young and emerging evaluators, I think, going forward, but many others as well. AI and using AI will be so essential for us. Now, sometimes we can reject it again and say, oh no, we don't want to use it. But it's a reality. It will be a strong aspect before. So evaluation associations, this is the last word just to say about that. Evaluation associations should do better job at thinking about the competences now, even in this new era, a new time that we have. Yes, of course, well-established evaluation associations have competences for a long time, but they have to revisit them because things are changing so quickly in terms of the challenges and the opportunities. Thanks.
Thank you, Khalil. And Irene, I'm very sorry I didn't see your hand, so I would like to invite you to please provide what you wanted to say at your response to the social media question. But there was also somebody else, Adrienne Harris from South Africa, who was not that one. There was somebody saying that they really didn't understand quite well what do you mean when you say show them the exit, show them the future. So if you could re-elaborate a little bit about that.
Sure, I typed in the answer already for that person so they can read that. But let's focus maybe on some new questions. There's several questions which link to the social media around storytelling. And storytelling is very fashionable in the world of evaluation, in the world of research. Everybody wants to do and offer storytelling, workshops and courses and formats. I think Guy Innes raises an important point about how do you use storytelling without getting anecdotal, right? Because storytelling can be tiny little examples, caselets, let's say, and it links to social media. So I think that part of the problem that we often have is that our evidence focus is very small. It's we're saying this thing works on this hillside, you know, for these people on these for this problem, and we don't locate it in a bigger question often. And so I've used, and other people have been using, storytelling in the context of a systems framework. So it comes back to the question of what makes for a good facilitator. Is I think you have to be a systems thinker. You have to understand which frameworks you're bringing into your evaluation work. And the stories then can be mapped onto your systems framework to say this if we have enough stories, they can consolidate to something that feels like trustworthy evidence that this is an issue, or this is working, or this these narratives or these norms or these policies are effective. But it, you know, so the stories have to be mapped onto something that shows us the bigger perspective. And I think that kind of toing and froing between the micro and the macro is a very big challenge often for our evaluation profession. Is how do we keep our eye focused on the thing we've been asked to do, but then position it in the societal conversation and the societal kind of like time that we're living in to make it have relevance. And then you can use all kinds of infographics, and I mean there's amazing Vimeos on, there's all kinds of there's theater, there's wonderful, there's all kinds of formats that you can use, but you have to have the kind of the evidence base in a bigger context for it to be relatable for people, I believe.
Thank you. And I'd like to pass the microphone to Heriberto. And Heriberto, from in the Human Development Report, is there any recommendation that evaluators or decision makers should act right now? Is there anything that you would take from the report that really would be valuable for the community we are talking to today?
Yeah, so first, and I think Khalil made this point, the issue of artificial intelligence is something that is with us already. People perceive it, and therefore it's important to embrace it, but in the right way. So just to give you a sense of how people are perceiving artificial intelligence in their lives, right now we conducted a survey. Around 1 in 5 respondents around the world are already using artificial intelligence for human development, education, health, work, and the expectation is that around 2/3 of people will be using artificial intelligence or for human development in over 1 year. So, but then the question is how. And I already gave some examples, but something that is very important also from the perspective of the warnings is to avoid the temptation of the techno-solutionism. This is something that for us it's very tempting, right? So suddenly you discover a new technology, it's very exciting, and then you let the technology to drive all the process. So it's very essential to engage the communities, and I think many of the discussions today emphasize the importance of creating mechanisms to engage with communities. So then, whatever the progress we make of through the use of artificial intelligence, this is something that represents an improvement for the communities, and not something that just looks very, very nice from the perspective of the organization running the evaluation. Over.
Thank you, Heriberto. Thank you very much. And there was somebody from Nigusu Zelevke was saying, I'm particularly interested in the strategies recommended for conducting evaluation in a highly fragile context. So it would be very helpful also if we could touch on some of the key ethical considerations when carrying out evaluation in sensitive and complex environments. Would anybody like to speak to that? Khalil, please.
Yes, I could say, the question also, I think, can touch with the David presentation, because the question is also about what you said about the situation in Gaza, and how can, I think, journalism, but also evaluation could be similar. For evaluation in conflict affected and fragile countries, there are obviously a lot of resources in evaluation and colleagues specializing in this, and I'm more than happy to share with the asker as well some of the resources, and there are a couple of books actually in evaluation. But the ethical aspect you are mentioning is very, very important. I think it's the one size fit all evaluation and evaluation practices and evaluator doesn't work, especially in conflict affected countries. There's a lot of limitations there. We have to really understand. I guess also for journalism, it's the same exact thing. We don't work in the same lens everywhere. It doesn't work. It's risky for life in journalism, perhaps, but also for evaluators, I think it can be risky to the lives of rights holders, which even worse, I think, also, that if we don't consider that. And there's also a lot of limitations and constraints, political, ethical, logistical. There are so difficult sometimes to move from one place to another. But what I think it's also very important is to understand in the world that we are navigating as well now, that although we are talking about systems and working as evaluator globally, as many fields, also the local knowledge will be essential. Local treating the context, understanding the context, and place-based strategies, they will be very, very important. So yes, it's a globalized world, and yes, you have to be an evaluator and understand what is happening everywhere, because in this small village, but at the same time, every little, as Irene mentioned, I think with generalization and evaluation, it's really difficult to take one case and generalize on so many things. And every small village and a small city, it has own stories and what is happening, and each conflict also is the same. So for evaluation, I think to consider that it is very, very important as well to protect the people who are you're working with as well. Thank you.
David, would you like to expand on that?
Sorry, me. Yes.
Yes.
I completely agree with Khalil. If you look at, you simply cannot in a conflict area report in the same way that you can report in the rest of the world. I mean, I'll give you a couple of examples. There are some incredibly brave and some incredibly I respect them enormously, journalists still within Gaza, who are reporting daily on what is happening, and I don't have words to say how much I respect them. But journalists, the journalists from the BBC simply can't get access. So journalists, so Jeremy Bowen, for instance, who is the BBC's international editor, can't get access into Gaza to see what's actually happening unless he goes in with the Israeli Defense Force. And if he goes in with the Israeli Defense Force, do you genuinely think that he's getting a real perspective on what's happening in Gaza? Of course he's not, because it's part of the embedded journalism. In exactly the same way that within the occupied territories of Ukraine, independent journalists can't get into the occupied territories of Ukraine. And in fact, very few journalists can actually get to the front line in Ukraine unless they are embedded with Ukrainian troops. And so there are incredible limitations to journalism within conflict areas. Probably the last conflict that there was a little bit of freedom of movement for journalists was the war in the former Yugoslavia, where journalists could actually go behind both lines. But ever since then, it's been almost impossible unless you are embedded with one side or the other. And if you're embedded with one side or the other, you're not telling the full truth because you haven't got access to the full truth. You haven't got access to the evidence. You haven't got access to the people. You haven't got access to the same evaluational skills. I mean, there are so many similarities between evaluation and journalism in this respect. But you just have to, I mean, it's a mechanism and it's a way of reporting and being transparent with your audience in what you can report and what you can't report. Being transparent in saying, look, this is what is claimed to be happening in there, but we can't independently verify that. And so it comes back to what I was saying, that transparency. If you're going to get trust back with the audience, if you're going to get trust, you've got to be transparent about what you do know and what you don't know.
Thank you, David. I'd like to conclude this really engaging discussion that we had today with the $1 million question, which is how we ensure that evaluation findings are used for decision making. So if any words of wisdom before I turn over to Dugan for closing remark, but I'd love to hear from you if you have any ideas, experience, or what worked the best that you think could be helpful for us to hear today. Anna, I saw you.
I'm still undecided whether I don't have the answer to this, but it made me think about two things. Of course, we can make sure that we involve the decision makers in the process so that they own the results of the evaluation a little bit more. But I think we need to flip the language. We don't need to make sure that the evaluation findings are used for decision making. We needed to know what decisions the organization need to take and then conduct evaluations so that these decisions are informed by evidence. Because we start always from us, and I think we should not do that anymore. So I like to think, especially to have better dialogue with the organization itself and really understand the challenge that the organizations are facing, and then work towards that end. So that would be my answer.
Thank you. Irene?
I kind of want to challenge Anna a little bit on this. Partly because I don't think we live in an either or world. I think it's got to be a bit of both. But also if we take the starting point as what are the existing decisions, then where can we ever stretch the imagination and the action radius of the people who hold the power? So I think you've also got to invite them to a conversation to say, okay, well, you're deciding about this, where the next nuclear power station is, but actually, how about deciding about scaling up renewables? Because I do think we can get caught into the trap of a status quo focused evaluation contribution as to opposed to a boundary stretching and a frontier stretching contribution of evaluation. So it's probably not an either or. I think part of our problem is that we tend to think there has to be a choice. We have to do a bit of both. I was definitely going to say a bit more about what Anna said is if people aren't part of the process and the questions aren't partly triggered by their curiosity, you can throw 1 million one-page briefs and 5 million case studies at them and they won't care because it's just not interesting for them. And so starting with their curiosity, and that requires relationships, I think is really essential. So that's, but how you do that, it's a long-term endeavor. And finding the opportunities that allow themselves to say, hey, this thing that you're talking about, well, finally we have something for that. So there's a lot of awareness about the policy-making process that needs to come back into the evaluation profession, not just saying, hey, running afterwards with, all these reports and things that they should pay attention to.
Thank you, Irene. And it seems that a lot comes down to building a relationship with the people that we need to evaluate and we need to engage with. So I'm looking at the screen. Heriberto, would you like to go next?
Thank you. Yeah, so it's a very complicated question, but I think the most, for us at least, because we produce this evaluation at the global level, is the issue of relevance. And we think that many of the instruments that we have been developing over the last few years are not super relevant to navigate what's coming. So therefore, we need to be constantly thinking about what is necessary what we are not capturing in order to be relevant. So in that sense, we are exploring new sources of information, new mechanisms, but also something very important that came across this conversation, being able to be in closer contact with the different stakeholders, because there are many things that we cannot figure out ourselves here. We just need to be assessing what is happening. And something very important that has emerged over the last few years, for at least for us, is the improvement in our understanding of subjective indicators, because listening to people's voices is very important, and there are many instrument surveys, but also direct connection with the communities. Over.
Thank you. Khalil?
Thank you, Patricia. I think just to spot the light on one thing, I think what was happening now around the world, and you see, and historically how evaluation happened and where it started, where you have healthy governance and democracy, there is demand for evaluation because the parliament want to use it, the policymaker want to use it. The demand is very, very important. And once you see in the political systems and the regimes, things change and people, young people, yes, go to demonstration, but don't vote, or you don't have really democratic involvement, policymakers will not be advocating for evaluation in this very strong way. Yes, you will have people who care and want to do their job well, and they care about learning and accountability. But what we are seeing now, and I think that this will continue to happen, and even in the language we hear now globally, things people used not to say, now they say because they feel it's okay. Things they used to do, and now maybe they don't do because they feel it's okay not to do evaluation. It's okay, and I think as evaluators, we have to really advocate for evaluation with the public. Exactly. Again, I come back because I think to me, really, what is really interesting today about linkage with journalism. Journalists also to advocate with the public to see how important is journalism if there was no journalism. Same with evaluation. And if we leave it to the policymakers and the politicians, they will play with us left and right. We can involve them in the process. We can do reference group with them. And if they feel no accountability to them, nothing will happen. So I've seen it in my evaluation career so far. Evaluation thrives where is the demand for it happens, where people put their money, where words are. And if you don't have resources, if you don't have championship for evaluation, it will be in the back seat.
Thank you. I'll come back to you, Khalil, in just a few seconds. But David, I'd like for you to conclude this discussion before we move towards the end of the conversation.
I mean, without wishing to once again agree completely with what Khalil was just saying, I think it's fascinating to look at countries where there is a free independent press, countries where there is a free independent evaluation. I think there are dangerous signs that when the press is under attack, evaluation will be under attack. And there are very dangerous signs in many countries where the press used to be free and used to be independent, and now free press is under attack. And I think that's incredibly dangerous. As soon as you have a country where the only press that has access to, say, for instance, the president or the ruling power are people that agree with him, that's dangerous. And I look at different parts of the world, and I'm not going to mention those different parts of the world, but I think we all know what I'm talking about. And I feel concerned about it. And it's but I do want to end on a positive light. I do think in every country that I work in, where the passion of the independent journalist and the passion of people that want to genuinely and in many cases risk their own lives to tell the truth and to tell evidence-based independent stories, that passion exists, and that passion is thriving in many countries that I work in and I work with.
Thank you so much. Has been inspiring for me. I think also based on the comments I read, inspiring for all the people that have joined us today in this discussion. So before I pass the microphone to Dugan Fraser, who is the program manager of the Global Evaluation Initiative, to conclude this, I'd like to invite Khalil to explain why he has a torch in his background and what it means and what it stands for.
Thank you so much. Yes, here the torch, it is actually, oh, no. So I'm very much looking forward to hear from Dugan. He's very patient there, and I see him listening, and we would love to hear from you, Dugan. But just very quickly to say, like our esteemed speakers and moderator and everyone here mentioning to end on positive, thought, and also in evaluation field, we have a lot of hope. There's a lot of challenges, but I think there's a lot of hope. And this EvalTorch, it is an initiative from a campaign, a global campaign to advocate for evaluation with policymakers and others called Eval for Action. So you see the action is very important. It is a partnership between UNDP Independent Evaluation Office, Evaluate Global Network, where we have young evaluators are very, very strong advocate for evaluation, the International Organization for Cooperation and Evaluation that I represent, and the Global Parliamentarian Forum. So we have the politicians and the parliamentarians as well with us. And this EvalTorch actually was lit and ignited before in 2015, 10 years ago, and traveled through in different parliaments in different countries. And you can see where actually some events happen in those countries. And then you have also parliamentarians engaging that actually resulted sometimes even in policies and laws and sometimes in constitutional articles advocating for evaluation. So this EvalTorch, we passed it today to the Prime Minister of Sri Lanka here, which was a really nice event. And next to Dugan, after the Prime Minister, and it is really not an object. We have it actually as an object, but here it is a graphic, but it is our shared commitment, unwavering commitment to the power of evaluation. And remembering really to remind us that evaluation is not a technical process. Although as technical people, sometimes we come back to this. It is truly a dynamic force for transformation, a catalyst for social betterment, equity, social justice, environmental justice, and overall positive change in our field and in our world in general. So in passing this torch, we are entrusting a responsibility, a shared responsibility, a commitment to all of us to ensure that evaluation remains relevant, impactful, and fit for the future, not just globally, but crucially at local and regional levels. So with all our colleagues here with us today and doing the local events to think about that as well, what it means for them. Let us continue to carry the light forward, embracing innovation during the Global Evaluation Week, fostering collaborations, and also empowering the next generation of our evaluation field that they will carry the torch and take it forward. And with that, I pass the torch to you, Dugan. And thank you so much, Patrizia.
Thank you so much, Khalil. And honestly, I feel very honored to accept the torch from you. I take it with a deep, deep appreciation. Thank you. I really, really respect, and what you've said resonates with me very strongly. And I think that everything you've said has been really on point. I'm going to, at the risk of ruining your great contributions, just share a little bit of what I've taken from the conversation today. But I do feel that one of the contributions in the chat box that you really do all need to read is from the marvelous Nancy McPherson, who says so very well many of the things that I would like to say. But I think most of all, really what we are getting to is a place where we understand that evaluation is a really precious field of practice, and it needs stewardship. It needs thorough, sustained, ongoing stewardship. Stewardship from the moment where we decide to do an evaluation, where we decide what the key evaluation questions are, through to where the evidence has been produced, to where it's being used and where it's being shared. And that stewardship is the responsibility of all of us. And that stewardship is the action that the EvalTorch is driving us to take up and really make a better effort. I think when we talk about evaluation stewardship, we're talking about the things that relate to what goes on in a particular place, what happens with particular people, and how do those things then become generalizable lessons? How do we take a particular experience and draw from it lessons that can be applied elsewhere? I think these things are really critical, and so much of what's been said today just resonates with me really strongly. I think we need to be clear about generalizability. But secondly, I think the other thing that Dave has said today that I just is ringing in my head loudly is our need to be absolutely honest about the limitations of our work. That we cannot be claiming truths that are not true. That we cannot claim that we know a situation or we're able to provide advice when we're not. And I think that one of the things as evaluators that we've really got to start taking on board is this challenge to be increasing the demand for what we offer. We've overestimated the supply. We've delivered really great techniques. We're brilliant on methods. We have a data avalanche, which is absolutely crushing all of us. But we are not understanding properly what the demand for what we offer is. And I do believe that that's something we could spend a lot of time thinking about. But while I say this, I find myself also thinking about what Irene said about being boundary stretching. I do think that a lot of what we need to do is to be inspiring people. We want to incite your imagination, and we want to make you dream of a better world and think about how we can get there, not in fantastical ways, but in practical, real-life ways. And I want to finish by saying that I think one of the most important things that was said today is that evaluation is a signal of the strength of democracy. When people are involved in democratic processes, they need evidence on which to deliberate, and evaluation provides that evidence, and it needs to get better at supporting deliberation. One of the things that has been said already today, which I really believe very strongly, is that evaluation has to do more to understand itself as a component within larger systems. And those larger systems require a portfolio perspective. One of the sessions at the Glocal this year, next week, is on portfolio approaches to M&E, and I think that it would be great if people could participate in that. But more than anything, we've had over 200 people on the call today. Those are 200 members of our community who are inspired, who are ready to take up the torch that Khalil is putting in our hands. And I want to thank the team that organized this event, Patrizia, Megan, Claudia. Thank you all to everybody who's participated, who sat through these sessions. We really appreciate your participation. And I wish you all a lovely, lovely Tuesday for the rest of your day. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Dugan. A very great thank you to all the speakers. It was an honor to have you with us today. Thank you, Claudia. You have been behind so much of what's happening this week and next. You're a great coordinator for Glocal, so your work is appreciated. Megan, you are behind the scene of every event. So thank you, everybody that has made this possible. We have used AI-based interpretation today. These allow us to give you more languages. We hope that you have used it. And if you did so, let us know if it was useful and if you would like to see this more used in the future. Thanks again. Remember that we are going to have regional launches this week. So tomorrow and the day after we will have regional events similar to this one. And then the Glocal Week will be June 2 to 6 with over 350 events, I think 377, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you very much. Have a good evening and see you soon. Bye.
Thank you for the great moderator as well. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.